Picture this. 12,000 exhausted men are standing on the dusty, sweltering plains of Panipat. The date is April 21st, 1526. They are thousands of miles from home, they have zero reinforcements coming, and backing down, well, that means absolute extinction. The man leading them is an exiled, homeless prince who had already lost his own kingdom not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. The guy was completely broke. And right in front of him was an enemy force so massively huge, every single military strategist in the ancient world would have bet their life that this prince and his tiny army were about to be completely and utterly obliterated. Welcome to today's Explainer.
Just think about this number for a second. 1,000. That is how many giant, heavily armored war elephants were staring them down from the enemy's front line. Now, these weren't just animals. We're talking about the heavy tanks of the ancient world. They were literally designed to crush enemy lines, shatter morale, and physically trample human beings into the dirt.
And right behind that wall of elephants was an absolute ocean of soldiers, 100,000 men belonging to the Sultan of Delhi, facing off against our exiled Prince Babur's 12,000 battle-hardened but vastly outnumbered troops. It was an absurd mathematical mismatch, an 8-to-1 disadvantage. Honestly, on paper, this shouldn't even be called a battle. It should have been an execution.
Let's see how this all builds by looking at exactly who this underdog was. Because to understand how Babur pulled off one of the greatest tactical victories in military history, you have to realize one fundamental truth about him. Babur was desperate. Sure, he was born carrying the blood of 2 of history's most terrifying conquerors, Genghis Khan and Timur. But as we know, pedigree doesn't buy you an army. At just 14 years old, he actually managed to conquer the magnificent city of Samarkand. But while he was busy celebrating, rebels stole his home city of Fergana right out from under him. When he rushed back to save it, his own troops just deserted him. In the blink of an eye, he went from ruling 2 kingdoms to ruling absolutely nothing. For the next decade, he lived like a ghost, capturing and losing Samarkand 3 separate times. By the year 1504, this descendant of Genghis Khan was literally sleeping in a borrowed tent in the freezing mountains of Kabul with just a tiny band of loyal followers.
But Babur was smart enough to read the writing on the wall. Central Asia was a complete dead end for him. The politics were just too volatile, his enemies were way too entrenched. He needed a total pivot. He needed to look south, toward India. Now, this was a land of legendary, unimaginable wealth, but crucially, it was currently being ruled by a highly fractured and unstable leadership. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the story gets incredibly tense. How on earth does a guy who was just freezing in a borrowed tent plan to march into a massively wealthy, heavily defended empire and take it over? I mean, he doesn't have the numbers, he doesn't have the treasury, and he is walking right into the lion's den. The answer actually lies with the man sitting on the throne in Delhi, Sultan Ibrahim Lodi. Lodi was the ruler of the Delhi Sultanate, but he was a deeply unpopular and brutal tyrant. He was so cruel and so despised by his own people that his nobles, even his own uncles, were secretly writing letters to Babur. They were practically begging this foreign mercenary to cross the mountains, invade their country, and overthrow their sultan. Babur, obviously seeing the opportunity of a lifetime, accepted the invitation.
Fast forward to late 1525, and Babur, along with his 12,000 men, crossed the rugged mountains and march onto the plains of Panipat. They were just 50 miles north of Delhi, 50 miles away from the ultimate prize. But the secret was out. Sultan Lodi wasn't going to just let him walk right into the capital. Lodi marched out to meet him with that terrifying massive force we talked about earlier.
Now, what's really interesting about this whole setup is the sheer impossibility of Babur's situation. He is outnumbered basically 5 to 8 times over, depending on which historical account you read. If he orders a traditional frontal charge, his 12,000 men are going to be swallowed whole by that 100,000-strong army and crushed beneath the feet of 1,000 elephants. It is pure, unadulterated suicide.
So Babur doesn't fight a traditional battle. He plays 4-dimensional chess and turns the entire dusty plain of Panipat into a meticulously engineered death trap. Step 1, he anchors his entire right flank against the physical, walled city of Panipat itself, meaning absolutely nobody can attack him from the right. Step 2, on his left flank, he digs massive, deep trenches, fills them with jagged wooden stakes, and covers them with branches so they are totally impassable. By securing both his left and his right, Babur brilliantly achieves Step 3. He forces this massive, sprawling 100,000-man army to squeeze together and attack him directly into a narrow, concentrated center bottleneck.
But how do you survive that center? Well, this is where Babur introduces something the Indian subcontinent hadn't quite seen before. He deploys a formation called the Araba. Babur rounded up over 700 wooden bullock carts and tied them end to end, chaining them together with thick rawhide ropes. It created a massive mobile barricade. But he intentionally left very specific, narrow gaps in this wall of carts every 50 yards or so. This cart wall basically acted as an impenetrable physical shield for his men against the charging masses.
And tucked right behind that bulletproof shield of carts was Babur's ultimate secret weapon, cutting-edge technology borrowed directly from the Ottomans, matchlock cannons and muskets. Operated by master Turkish gunners named Ustad Ali and Mustafa Rumi, this was a scale of gunpowder warfare that the Delhi Sultanate was completely and utterly unprepared for.
But Babur didn't just have guns. He had a hybrid strategy. The second half of this master plan was the tulugma. This was a sophisticated Ottoman flanking tactic utilizing elite, lightning-fast horse archers. Remember those 50-yard gaps he left between the carts? Those were doors. The plan was for his cavalry to burst out of those gaps, charge the enemy, fire armor-piercing arrows, and then rapidly retreat back behind the safety of the carts before the enemy could even react.
All right, the stage is set. The sun rises on April 21st, 1526. The tension on that battlefield must have been absolutely suffocating. Across the plain, Sultan Lodi sees what looks like a tiny, insignificant line of troops. Fully confident in his overwhelming numbers, Lodi sounds the war horns and orders his 100,000 men and 1,000 giant elephants to charge headfirst into the center. The ground is literally shaking. Will a line of chained wooden carts actually hold back a stampede of this magnitude?
So the crucial point is, as Lodi's massive, sprawling army hits the bottleneck Babur created between the walled city and the trenches, they physically cannot fit. They squeeze tighter and tighter together until their forward momentum completely dies. They grind to a dead halt right in front of the chained carts. And the very second they stop moving, Babur gives his gunners the signal.
Boom! The earth absolutely shatters. The Ottoman cannons erupt in blinding flashes of fire and roaring thunder. The blast just tears through Lodi's front lines. But here's the crazy part. The real genius of the gunpowder wasn't just killing soldiers. It was the noise. Those 1,000 heavily armored war elephants had never heard the deafening crack of artillery before. They absolutely panicked. The beasts spun around in terror and began blindly stampeding away from the noise, trampling thousands of Lodi's own infantry in the process. It was pure, unadulterated chaos.
And while the elephants are busy destroying Lodi's own front lines, Babur strikes with devastating speed. He triggers the tulugma. His elite fast cavalry sweeps out from the gaps in the carts, riding completely around the flanks of the trapped, chaotic army. From the rear, they rain tens of thousands of armor-piercing arrows down on the clumped-together soldiers. Lodi's massive army is now completely encircled and trapped in a deadly crossfire of muskets from the front and arrows from the back. It's a complete slaughter. By noon, we're talking less than 6 hours, the seemingly invincible 100,000-strong army completely collapses. Sultan Ibrahim Lodi himself is killed on the battlefield, alongside 20,000 of his men.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how one single morning can completely change the trajectory of the entire globe. With just a fraction of the soldiers, the homeless prince from Fergana marched into Delhi and Agra as a conqueror. He laid the foundation for the Mughal Empire. This is the exact same dynasty that would go on to construct the breathtaking Taj Mahal. At its absolute height, this empire would command a staggering 25% of the entire global economy, and they would rule most of the Indian subcontinent for the next 3 centuries. It is, without a doubt, one of the most significant underdog victories in human history.
But, the story of Babur himself ends on a surprisingly quiet, almost poignant note. Despite spending his entire life fighting, struggling, and finally winning this glittering, wealthy new empire, he barely got to enjoy it. Babur only ruled his new conquest for 4 short years before he died in 1530.
And honestly, this is a detail that tells you so much about who he really was underneath all that armor of a conqueror. As he lay dying, his final wish was not to be buried in some massive, opulent tomb in his wealthy new Indian capital. No, he explicitly requested to be taken back to Kabul, that mountainous city where he had once slept in a freezing, borrowed tent, and buried in a simple garden completely open to the sky. He had absolutely no desire for the elaborate, towering mausoleums that his descendants would later become so famous for building.
He also left behind something that's arguably more enduring than his empire, his memoir, the Baburnama.
It stands today as one of the most candid, deeply vulnerable autobiographies ever written by a monarch. He didn't just write a highlight reel about his glorious victory at Panipat. He wrote openly about his crippling homesickness, his repeated, crushing humiliations, and the deep emotional failures he endured during those years wandering as a broke mercenary. He let history see the real human being behind the myth.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a massive question to think about. Look at the staggering odds of Panipat. Was Babur's victory the result of pure, unparalleled tactical military genius, playing four-dimensional chess with terrain and psychology? Or did he simply get incredibly lucky by bringing new gunpowder technology to an enemy still fighting the wars of the past? Think about how history might have changed if those elephants hadn't turned around. If you love this deep dive and want to keep untangling the incredible stories of our past, make sure you subscribe so you never miss our next explainer. Keep questioning history, and I'll see you in the next one.